From New York, this is Democracy Now!
Less than a week after the horrific murders of 8 people and the assault on the AAPI community in Georgia, while the flag was still flying half-staff with the tragedy, another American city has been scarred by gun violence and resulting trauma.
10 dead in Boulder, Colorado. 8 dead in Atlanta, Georgia. 2 mass shootings in the span of a week.
This cannot be our new normal. We should be able to feel safe in our grocery stores. We should be able to feel safe in our schools, in our movie theaters, and in our communities. We need to see a change because we have lost far too many lives.
As the nation mourns, will lawmakers finally take on the gun lobby and pass gun control? We'll go to Colorado to speak with State Representative Tom Sullivan, who entered politics after his son Alex was shot dead with 11 others at the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado in 2012. Alex was celebrating his 27th birthday. Plus, we'll speak to longtime investigative journalist Frank Smythe, author of The NRA, The Unauthorized History. All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Calls are mounting to rapidly enact meaningful gun control reform after the second tragic mass shooting in under a week. The 10 victims of the massacre in Boulder at a King Soopers grocery store have now been identified as Denny Stong, Nevin Stanisic, Ricky Olds, Trelana Bartkowiak, Suzanne Fountain, Terry Leiker, Kevin Mahoney, Lynn Murray, Jody Waters, and Officer Eric Talley, who is one of the police officers who responded to the shooting. The suspect, 21-year-old Ahmed Ali Alawi Elisa, has been charged with 10 counts of first-degree murder and 1 charge of attempted murder. Police say he purchased an AR-556 pistol less than a week before Monday's massacre. Family members say they believe Elisa suffered from mental illness, including severe paranoia. President Biden called on Congress Tuesday to pass new restrictions on gun laws.
I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again.
The White House also said executive action on guns was being considered. Meanwhile, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing on reducing gun violence. This is Connecticut Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal.
Inaction has made this horror completely predictable. Inaction by this Congress makes us complicit. Now is the time for action to honor these victims.
The mass shootings in Atlanta and Boulder are also prompting even louder calls for Democrats to end the filibuster, as Republicans are expected to block passage of any significant gun control reform. We'll have more on all of this after headlines. The World Health Organization is warning most regions of the world are seeing an increase in COVID-19 infections. Southeast Asia has the highest proportion of new cases, which shot up nearly 50% over the last week. The Philippines registered a record high of over 8,000 daily COVID-19 cases this week, as some hospitals near capacity. The current surge has led to increased restrictions in the sprawling Metro Manila region. Much of the Philippines has been under the longest and strictest lockdown in the world, as many struggle with hunger and loss of income. Rights groups also warn the authoritarian President Rodrigo Duterte is using coronavirus restrictions to further consolidate power. In Brazil, COVID-19 deaths continue to soar, topping a record 3,200 deaths Tuesday. Brazil is second only to the United States in total deaths and infections. In Israel, early vote tallies show Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's Likud party is in the lead, but still short of majority, leaving him to appeal to other right-wing leaders and possibly a small Arab party in the hopes of forming a coalition. If Netanyahu or others fail to do so, Israel could be headed towards a fifth election to determine the country's next leader. In Burma, a 7-year-old girl was fatally shot by security forces, becoming the youngest known victim of the deadly crackdown on protests since the February 1st military coup. Her father was reportedly the target of a raid, and the young child was killed at home, sitting in his lap. Save the Children says over 20 children have been killed in the crackdown. Protesters launched a silent strike today in an effort to shut down towns and cities across Burma. On Monday, the European Union and the U.S. imposed sanctions on individuals and groups tied to the coup. Some rights groups say the sanctions don't go far enough and should target all of the military junta's economic interests. In Ethiopia, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has acknowledged for the first time Eritrean soldiers crossed into the northern Tigray region and were involved in the bloody conflict that erupted in November. Harrowing witness accounts have emerged of Eritrean soldiers killing Tigrayan men and boys and committing acts of sexual violence, including against displaced people. The UN has said multiple parties may have committed war crimes and crimes against humanity since the start of the conflict. In Mozambique, the United Nations warns up to 1 million people could be displaced by June amidst the escalating violence in the northern Cabo Delgado province. Some 2,000 people have been killed since 2017 when fighters allied with the Islamic State group began an anti-government insurgency. This month, the Biden administration declared the insurgents a foreign terrorist organization and sent U.S. Green Berets to Mozambique to train soldiers in counterinsurgency. Amnesty International said in a new report published this month that all sides in the conflict have committed war crimes, including the insurgents and government forces. In Yemen, a study by Save the Children has found children made up at least a quarter of civilian deaths killed in the U.S.-backed Saudi-led war between 2018 and 2020. The group says at least 2,300 children were killed during that time, though the death toll is likely much higher. Earlier this month, the World Food Programme warned Yemen is headed toward the biggest famine in modern history, projecting around 400,000 Yemeni children under the age of 5 could die from acute malnutrition this year as the Saudi war and blockade continues. In Australia, at least 2 people are dead and over 40,000 have been evacuated from Sydney and other parts of New South Wales after the region was battered by record rains, which triggered historic flooding. Scientists warn such extreme, deadly weather patterns are becoming Australia's new normal as global heating worsens. In Honduras, another indigenous Lenca environmental activist has been assassinated. 41-year-old Juan Carlos Cerros Escalante, who was fighting against a hydroelectric dam in northwestern Honduras, was reportedly shot to death in front of his children. At least 12 environmental activists and land and water defenders were killed in Honduras last year. Violence has skyrocketed in Honduras since the U.S.-backed 2009 coup and under President Juan Orlando Hernandez, a key U.S. ally. In Texas, 2 indigenous leaders who were forced to flee Guatemala in 2019 are denouncing the ongoing violence against indigenous land and water defenders and demanding justice for indigenous political prisoners and assassinated leaders. Gaspar Cobo and Francisco Chavez are now seeking asylum in the United States. They were stuck in the border city of Juarez for over a year under Trump's Remain in Mexico policy and were ultimately allowed to enter the United States after receiving death threats from a local drug cartel. The 2 were recently released from an ICE prison in El Paso and held a virtual news conference.
We are not in the United States because we are searching for better living opportunities. We are here by force. The best opportunities should be in our communities, and these opportunities do exist in Guatemala. But sadly, we are unable to live there because Guatemala is a failed state.
Chavez is a survivor of a 1982 massacre orchestrated by the U.S.-backed Guatemalan army officials, was a key eyewitness in the genocide case against dictator Efraín Ríos Montt. Cobo has long advocated for survivors of the genocide. In Minneapolis, a jury has been selected for the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin, accused of killing George Floyd May 25, 2020, by kneeling on his neck for over 9 minutes. The jury is made up of 1 black woman, 3 black men, 3 white men, 6 white women, and 2 women who identify as multiracial. Opening statements are set for next Monday. Here in New York, over 3,000 research and teaching assistants at Columbia University are on day 10 of their strike demanding fair wages, improvements to health care, and child care provisions. Workers are also asking for third-party arbitration in cases of harassment and discrimination. Democracy Now! Spoke to some of the strikers.
Columbia, I think, likes people to have the impression that every course at this university is taught and made happen by an august, tenured professor who's been working here for 40 years and wears a tweed jacket. But in reality, this university does not work without graduate students. Acknowledging our union is acknowledging that, and that's what we want to make happen.
We are at an $11 billion institution. The president of this institution is getting paid $4.6 million in salary, and the majority of us who make the work of this university possible, who enable its mission, are not able to afford the rent.
The U.S. Senate has confirmed Vivek Murthy to be a Surgeon General, reprising a role he filled under President Obama. Murthy was a coronavirus advisor to Biden during his campaign and transition. The Senate also confirmed Shalonda Young as Deputy Director of the Office of Management and Budget. Young, who is the Democratic Staff Director for the House Appropriations Committee, is favored by many powerful Democrats to lead the OMB after Neera Tanden withdrew her nomination early this month. In other cabinet news, Democratic Senators Tammy Duckworth of Illinois and Mazie Hirono of Hawaii stepped back from their threat to block upcoming votes on Biden's nominees who are not people of color in protest over the lack of Asian Americans named to top positions. The senators said they received assurances from the White House late Tuesday, which vowed to add a senior-level Asian American Pacific Islander liaison. Advocates are calling for the release of Standing Rock water protector Steve Martinez, who's been behind bars for over 3 weeks on contempt charges. Martinez refused to give testimony before a federal grand jury about injuries to Sophia Wilansky, a water protector whose arm was severely wounded during a police crackdown on anti-pipeline protests in 2016. Martinez says prosecutors are trying to shift the blame for Wilansky's injuries from law enforcement to water protectors. And in Illinois, the Evanston City Council has agreed to pay black residents reparations for historic housing discrimination, making it the first U.S. city to adopt such a measure. The city will distribute some $400,000 to up to 16 families to be used towards housing-related costs. The money comes mostly from a $10 million fund of marijuana tax revenues. This is Delois Robinson, whose family was subject to the racist practice of redlining in Evanston.
You know, it kind of deals with your self-esteem. And so it's a thing of, am I good enough to be able to stand on my own and say, no, I want property here, or I want to cross the redlining.
In related news, earlier this month, Catholic Jesuit priests vowed to raise $100 million in reparations for descendants of people it forced into slavery. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. When we come back, as the nation mourns the massacres in Boulder and Atlanta, will lawmakers finally take on the gun lobby and pass gun control? We'll go to Colorado to speak with State Representative Tom Sullivan, who entered politics after his son Alex was shot dead with 11 others at the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado in 2012. Alex was celebrating his 27th birthday that day. Stay with us.
Supieron que estaban 45 cerebros y un corazón. Ante tal descubrimiento y estupor de los presentes, vieron la luz conservados cual cuerpos de faraón. Aquí sin mito ni rito, abandonados el tiempo, arropados por el lodo cerca de alguna urbanización. 45 cerebros y un corazón. Silencio, siguen ahí en silencio sus
45 Minds and One Heart by Maria Arnal and Marcel Bajes. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Mourners have been gathering in Boulder, Colorado at a makeshift memorial outside the King Soopers supermarket, where a gunman using an AR-15-style semi-automatic pistol shot dead 10 people Monday. The victims included a police officer, 3 grocery store workers. The mass shooting came less than a week after a gunman in the Atlanta area killed 8 people when he attacked 3 Asian-owned spas. The twin massacres have led to growing calls for national gun control legislation. On Tuesday, President Biden called on Congress to reinstate an assault weapons ban.
I don't need to wait another minute, let alone an hour, to take common sense steps that will save the lives in the future and to urge my colleagues in the House and Senate to act. We can ban assault weapons and high-capacity magazines in this country once again.
In Boulder, the suspected gunman, Ahmed Alaliwi Elisa, has been charged with 10 counts of murder. Elisa is a 21-year-old former high school wrestler. His family says he suffers from delusions. Police have not determined a motive. Elisa bought the gun on March 16th. The shooting came just a week after a Colorado state judge blocked a city law in Boulder barring assault weapons and large-capacity magazines, ruling in favor of the National Rifle Association's Colorado affiliate. On Tuesday, Democratic Congressman Joe Neguse, who represents Boulder, said mass shootings cannot become the new normal.
There's a lot that we don't know. There's a lot still unfolding from yesterday's events. But let me simply say this. This cannot be our new normal. We should be able to feel safe in our grocery stores. We should be able to feel safe in our schools, in our movie theaters, and in our communities. We need to see a change because we have lost far too many lives.
Hours after the shooting in Boulder, Republican Congresswoman Lauren Boebert of Colorado sent out a fundraising email to supporters urging them to say hell no to gun control. Prior to her recent election, Boebert was known for owning a restaurant in Rifle, Colorado called Shooter's Grill, where she encouraged her staff to openly carry their guns while working. For many residents of Colorado, the massacre in Boulder brought back painful memories. In 1999, 2 high school students shot dead 12 students and a teacher at Columbine High School. In 2012, a gunman shot dead 12 people and injured 70 others when he opened fire at a movie theater in Aurora, Colorado. In 2015, a gunman attacked a Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs, killing 3 people. We go to Colorado, where we're joined by State Representative Tom Sullivan. He entered politics after his son Alex was killed in the Aurora movie theater shooting on July 20th, 2012. Alex had gone to the movies to celebrate his 27th birthday. Tom Sullivan joins us from his home in Centennial, Colorado. Representative Sullivan, welcome to Democracy Now! Condolences on what happened on Monday and on the loss of your son.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Well, we so appreciate you taking this time. Can you talk about where you were about 2:30 on Monday when you got the news about what was unfolding and your reaction?
Well, I was with a friend of mine. We were smoking cigars, watching NCAA basketball, watching the Pac-12 win again. And that's what the TVs were on, and wasn't really watching my phone or anything. It wasn't until the game was over, we got in the car, and all of a sudden, I started seeing stuff. And then by the time I got home, it was, okay, they're having a press conference, get ready. And then it was, okay, here we go again. And it took me back to, the day that it all happened to us. And so I get kind of frozen to the point to watch all of that, because I know that a lot of those people who have been impacted today were watching everything that was happening, to my family and Alex's friends and all of that. And so that's what I was doing. I was watching and seeing how things progressed, and then, knowing the timeline of what's ahead for everybody.
Well, actually, let's go back in time. Let's go back to your son's 27th birthday, when he went into that late-night showing movie at the Aurora Theater. And you were not a politician then. If you can talk about what unfolded afterwards, your calls for gun control and what brought you into state politics. You ran, lost, ran, but ultimately you won against a very strong gun advocate.
That's right. Yeah. Right afterwards, after the Aurora Theater massacre, then, less than 6 months later, we had the Sandy Hook massacre. And then that's when that was the last time they had a big vote on trying to get background checks. So we were watching that unfold on TV. I was watching those parents and seeing what they were doing, going to Congress, handing out pictures of their children, talking about their children's lives, the brothers and sisters of the teachers who were murdered that day as well, passing out, pictures and stuff. And then here in Colorado in 2013, we actually passed 5 common sense gun violence prevention bills. We passed the background check bill. We passed limiting high-capacity magazines. We passed making people pay for their background checks, doing things about domestic violence, doing things about making people actually show up in front of somebody to get a concealed carry permit. We then had a trial that finally got finished. And all during that time, I would show up at, anywhere where I thought I could, make my voice get heard. I had to go down to our state capitol and fight each year while they tried to repeal the common sense laws that we passed. And when the trial was all over, there was kind of a lull of time. And then I remember it was over Thanksgiving weekend. My daughter was headed overseas for a holiday, and I told her to give it some thought. I said, I think when you come back, I said, I'm going to run for office. I said, this is too much. And I actually just almost went down to the Democratic Party's door and kind of knocked on the door and said, okay, I'm going to run. Which one of these, do I run for the Senate or do I run for the House? And is there something I need to sign? Because I'm ready to get started. And, that's what we did. And, started putting things together and just, worked our tails off, learned a lot. People, actually saw that, the message that we're talking about can actually win elections. This is a very Republican district. My wife and I have lived here for 29 years. A Democrat has never won this seat here before. There were times Democrats didn't even run. There's statues down at the state capitol for former Republican legislators from this district. But we're not going to move because this is our home. This is where, Alex and Megan grew up, and that's where we're going to stay here. And we just did the work, did the outreach.
And you lost the first time, right, Tom?
Yes. We ran for the Senate, which is twice as big as our House districts. We have 35 senators. We have 65 state representatives. But we got our name out there. We were able to raise money. We got more votes than a Democrat has ever gotten for the seat before. And this is a district that likes to vote. So these people are engaged in the process. And I mean, the Republicans had to spend over $1 million against me just to get me to just to make sure that their person won. I mean, they've never had to do that before. And I know our running helped other races because they had to divert resources to try and defend what had always been a Republican seat.
And so you then ran for the assembly and you won, and they tried to recall you, and then you won again.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, because, we knocked in the 2018 race collectively, my team, we knocked over 65,000 door. I was the second best door knocker in the country of anybody running for state representative. I lost 25 pounds walking up and down these streets, knocking, talking to people. And what I would tell them is introduce myself, tell them, who I was and who my son was when they would ask. I mean, because there would be the point. These people had been waited 5, 6, now up to 8 years to offer their condolences because they are in the community. They know what happened, to my son, Alex. I don't know that a lot of other politicians get people crying at the doorstep, or who then come after them down the street when they realize who that was that they just talked to. And, they want to get, this pre-COVID time when you could actually hug people.
And Representative Sullivan, you ran on a very clear gun control platform. Interestingly, and this goes to national politics, you had Governor Hickenlooper at the time, who's now a senator, who was pro-gun, but after Aurora, after Sandy Hook, who then actually changed and supported gun control legislation, which in very red, ultimately, although he's a Democrat, very conservative state, ultimately won, and shows across the country what is so shocking is that something like 90% of people support gun control. Something like 70% of NRA members support gun control. So it's an overwhelmingly both Republican and Democratic position at the grassroots level. And now, of course, Hickenlooper is in the Senate. But I want to go to what happened in Boulder. You have this 21-year-old young man, just like the one in Georgia, who is also 21 years old, who buys this weapon 6 days before he goes out and murders 10 people. But in the Friday before, just last Friday, the Boulder City Council, which had passed an automatic weapons ban, that ban was overturned by a judge. Can you talk about the significance of this? He bought his gun like a few days before.
Right. Well, but then again, I mean, he could have gone, he lived in Arvada, which isn't Boulder County. He could have bought it. I mean, I don't know where he bought it, but if he bought it in a gun store down the street from his house in Arvada, that was fine. And then he can transport it into Boulder. All that was doing was making sure that you couldn't do it within, the county or the city limits, of Boulder. That's the problem. That's the problem that we're having. We have background checks. We have high capacity magazine limits here in the state of Colorado. But if you want to drive 20 minutes and go into Wyoming, you can buy whatever it is you want and come back down. That's why it is imperative that we get the federal government to partner with us on these types of things. Like you said, 90% of Americans are in favor of background checks. Yet the last time we had a vote on it, we could only get 56% of the sitting senators to vote on it. So, I mean, just like I did, if you don't like the people who are you got elected, then run against them. Get them out of there. I used to go and talk to Mike Kaufman every year when we went to Washington, D.C., and he wouldn't get on board. And I told him, I said, I am going to do everything I can to see that you don't have this seat anymore. I will work for people to make sure that you lose this seat. And sure enough, we worked and we got Jason Crow in there, and Mike Kaufman is gone.
So let me ask you, Colorado has a high number of people who are survivors of gun violence, like yourself. I want to read to you from the Denver Post. A 2019 analysis by the Denver Post found Colorado had more mass shootings per capita than all but 4 states. The census-designated Denver Metropolitan Statistical Area had more school shootings per capita since 1999 than any of the country's 24 other largest metro areas. Why do you think this is the case? But, of course, ultimately, Colorado is not alone, as we just read, from one mass shooting to another all over the country that has gone on for years. The United States is actually alone, exceptional in the world for this level of mass shootings.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to explain, why that is. I think I've been thinking the last couple of days, maybe we get the coverage because of the affluence of the areas that these happen in. I mean, Littleton, Colorado is a beautiful town with, beautiful homes and schools and businesses. Boulder, Colorado, I mean, it's almost Camelot-like, that people want to go to. And you could see, I mean, all the shots that they're showing, on the broadcast show the mountains and, we've got snow there and that's where people want to be. But there's a influx of people from all over the country. A lot of people have moved. I mean, I grew up in upstate New York. My wife is from Rochester, New York. But this was the place to be. This was, where there was opportunities. This is where there was nice weather. This is where, we wanted. I mean, we came here, as young kids, and this is where we wanted to grow up, and this is where we wanted to raise a family.
Representative Sullivan, I wanted to go to Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. And, of course, Connecticut is where Sandy Hook was. Speaking on Tuesday at a previously scheduled Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on gun control.
Inaction has made this horror completely predictable. Inaction by this Congress makes us complicit. Now is the time for action to honor these victims with action, real action, not the fig leaves or the shadows that have been offered on the other side, along with hopes and thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers are not enough. And yet, thoughts and prayers is all we have heard from my colleagues on the other side. Thoughts and prayers must lead to action. There may be some question about what the motives were for the killer in Boulder, but there's no mystery about what needs to be done. Connecticut has shown by some of the strongest gun laws in the country that they work. But Connecticut, with those strong gun laws, is at the mercy of states with the weakest laws because guns do not respect state boundaries.
So that was Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal of Connecticut. This is Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana.
What has happened in the last few days, what's happened in the last years, is of course tragic. And I'm not trying to perfectly equate these two, but we have a lot of drunk drivers in America that kill a lot of people. We ought to try to combat that too. But I think what many folks on my side of the aisle are saying is that the answer is not to get rid of all sober drivers. The answer is to concentrate on the problem.
Comparing this situation to drunk drivers. Your response, State Representative Tom Sullivan, and what you want to see right now. And if you could respond to what might have surprised a number of people, President Biden calling for an assault weapons ban.
Yeah, first off, to Senator Kennedy, I mean, that's beyond absurd. If we would look at the advances that we have made in automobile safety since the first ones were built. I mean, do you know that we didn't have bumpers on cars? We didn't have seat belts. We didn't have, airbags. We've done all of that. We've made it safer to be in that. And the car industry is doing just fine. That's the same types of things we've asked from the gun industry to do. Make it safer to do type things. They'll still be profitable, and we can save lives. I mean, there was a big push against drunk driving. Now your bartender can't give you a beer if he thinks that you're intoxicated. But boy, if you look erratic and you look like you aren't thinking straight, and you go into a gun shop, as long as that credit card works, they're going to hand across the counter to you whatever it is you want. Okay, so there's no comparison between the two of those. As far as what President Biden said, yeah, we need help on the national level. Having the ability, I mean, assault rifles, I mean, that's all that does is put the mass into shootings. I mean, that's the one that allows them to kill more people quicker. I mean, it was, two summers ago, they're in Ohio. I mean, the guy had a 100-round drum hooked up to his firearm, and in 32 seconds, he killed, 35 people. And the police were right there. I mean, they were there within, in 40 seconds, and it wasn't time enough to be able to stop something like that.
And what are you calling for in the Colorado legislature where you're a state representative?
We just, yesterday afternoon, we passed out of a committee in the House a lost and stolen, to make sure that people who have their firearms lost or stolen report them, so that law enforcement knows the areas that these are happening at. They can, when they recover them later on, they can, get them back to the people, that kind of stuff. 60% of people already do it. But the opponents who were there talking about it, they right away started with the fear-mongering that they're notorious for, and were comparing us to Nazis, saying that this is the beginning of a gun registration. Well, 60% of them are already doing it of their own volition, and none of their firearms are getting confiscated. None of them are getting registered. Why all of a sudden, when we ask that people start to do it, because 60 is not enough? We need 70. We need 80% of the people to notify law enforcement when they have their firearms lost or stolen, or maybe better yet, they need to be more responsible with their firearms. We're also are working on a safe storage, making sure that, you lock up your firearms when they're in the presence of kids, when there's kids in the house, because we just have those accidents happening way too often. The statistics: 100 people die every day from gun violence. 22 of those are veterans who are dying by suicide. But also over 200 people are injured by accidental shootings. A lot of those are children.
I want to thank you so much for joining us, Democratic Colorado State Representative Tom Sullivan. He began running for office after his son Alex was killed in the Aurora movie theater mass shooting. It was his 27th birthday. And before we move into our next segment on the history of the NRA, The Democracy Now! Family would like to send our condolences to the family of Kevin Mahoney, who died in the Boulder shooting. Kevin's daughter, Erica, interned at Democracy Now! In 2010. She's now the news director at KZU Public Radio in California. On Tuesday, she posted a message on Twitter that went viral. It read, "I am heartbroken to announce that my dad, my hero, Kevin Mahoney, was killed in the King Soopers shooting in my hometown of Boulder, Colorado. My dad represents all things love. I'm so thankful he could walk me down the aisle last summer." Erica went on to write, quote, "I am now pregnant. I know he wants me to be strong for his granddaughter." Kevin Mahoney was 61 years old. Next up, we speak to longtime investigative journalist Frank Smythe, author of The NRA, The Unauthorized History. Stay with us.
And it ain't free, and you ain't gonna find it on late night TV, and it ain't those sirens, guns, it ain't police, and it ain't the most elaborate scheme, but it ain't like Sunday ice cream. It's not a word that I've ever heard. It's my only dream. It's my only dream. It's my only dream. It's my only dream.
My Only Dream by Eve Adams. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Less than a week after a gunman in Atlanta area killed 8 people when he attacked 3 Asian-owned spas, news broke Monday of another mass shooting. This time, 10 people were killed in a Boulder, Colorado grocery store. The powerful gun rights lobby group, the National Rifle Association, responded by tweeting out the text of the Second Amendment. The massacre in Boulder came just after a Colorado judge ruled in favor of the NRA's challenge to Boulder's ban on assault weapons, which was passed in 2018 after this type of weapon was used in the mass shooting in Parkland, Florida. The NRA celebrated the judge's ruling, saying it was written in a way that'll, quote, make it even harder to overturn should the city appeal it. And that, quote, the principles behind the ruling will apply to other localities who are considering passing any similar counterproductive ordinances. Well, none of this is new. Despite increasingly regular mass shootings, the NRA has pushed for gun rights since the 70s and insisted that more guns, not fewer, would prevent gun deaths. The NRA organized a rally in 1999 in Denver after the Columbine shooting at Columbine High School. After the 2012 Sandy Hook massacre in Connecticut, the NRA called for schools to arm themselves. This comes as the NRA is now actually in a deeply weakened state. It filed for bankruptcy last year after New York State Attorney General Letitia James sued them for fraud, saying the NRA's chief executive officer, Wayne LaPierre, and other top officials broke state and federal laws to enrich themselves and their families. LaPierre and the NRA were major supporters of President Trump. Now President Biden's calling on Congress to pass new gun restrictions. In fact, is calling on Congress to pass an assault weapons ban. For more on the role of the NRA and how we got there and what could happen next, we're joined by longtime investigative journalist Frank Smythe, author of the book The NRA, The Unauthorized History, former arms trafficking investigator for Human Rights Watch, has reported on the group for decades. Welcome back. Welcome back to Democracy Now! Frank, it's great to have you with us again. Give us a history of the NRA and how it's possible now, after these 2 mass shootings in a week, that the Congress, at least at this point, the Senate, has made clear that they are not for gun control.
Yeah, the NRA has a history that they don't want anyone to know about, because for over 100 years, the NRA was focused on improving marksmanship among military forces and later expanding that throughout the gun-owning community in the United States, meaning competitive target shooters and then also hunters. But in 1977, they underwent something they don't like to talk about, but which is still known in their own lore as the Cincinnati Revolt, when the NRA turned literally overnight into the nation's largest gun club, into the nation's largest gun lobby. So since then, the NRA has put forth an ideology which says that you can't have a little gun control without sacrificing all your guns. And a little gun control, even background checks, can precipitate a slippery slide to disarmament and then all the way to genocide. And to support this theory, they've distorted the history of the Holocaust, falsely claiming that gun control was a significant factor in enabling the Holocaust. And they've also more recently falsely claimed that the early NRA helped defend freed slaves during Reconstruction against the Ku Klux Klan. These go beyond historical revisions and are, in fact, fabulous inventions, but they allow them to claim that gun control itself is racist, not them, and that gun control is not only racist, but it's actually genocidal. And the problem is, this is ridiculous, and no Holocaust scholars support this theory, or Reconstruction historians, their theory about freed slaves or their claim. But the problem is the modern NRA, even as it's waning, even as it looks like it's going to dissolve as we know it and reincorporate in Texas, even as it's being pummeled by the New York Attorney General lawsuit where the evidence originated from within the NRA with Oliver North. Despite all of this, the NRA's ideology is something that they've convinced the overwhelming majority of elected officials in the GOP, especially on the national level, to believe, along with many, if not most, of the 74 million people who voted for Trump's reelection. And that's the problem. They've convinced a great many people that even background checks, which LaPierre supported back in 1999, by the way, but they've convinced people that even background checks pose an existential threat to their freedom and ultimately their lives. And this is the obstacle that Democrats and the Biden administration and other gun reformers face going forward.
So, and yet, the NRA is at its weakest point ever. It declared bankruptcy last year. And you couple that with the overwhelming support, Republican, Democrat, at the grassroots level in this country, even of the NRA membership, for gun control.
The NRA filed for bankruptcy, but this is a way of trying to escape the New York Attorney General lawsuit, right? But the thing to keep in mind, the NRA is weaker than it's ever been in the modern era, right? They had financial problems in prior centuries. But the gun rights movement, and the NRA is really the modern father of, that gave rise to the gun rights movement, is stronger today than it's ever been. And part of the evidence for this, Amy, is the fact that we are now undergoing in the United States something that is unprecedented among all the other unprecedented things, and that is what the NRA calls the great ammo shortage. Since last summer, since the Black Lives Matter protests, people went out and not only bought weapons, but they bought ammunition to the point that stores, online vendors, and retail stores, over-the-counter stores, ran out of ammunition starting last summer. The ammo shortage continued through 2020, and now the NRA expects that ammo shortage to last through most of 2021. So there are a great many people with a great deal of influence in the Republican Party who believe their ideology. So even as the NRA is weaker, the gun rights movement is stronger than ever. The gun reform movement, because of the Parkland students, is also stronger than ever, setting the stage for, I think, an epic battle. But right now, I don't think the Democrats have enough votes in the Senate probably to pass background checks, let alone the other measures that Biden has proposed.
Can you explain Manchin's position? He's not representing the overwhelming feeling of the people of West Virginia, yet he has already stated that he will not support two bills that the House just passed around gun control.
Joe Manchin is trying to walk a very fine line as a blue dog Democrat from West Virginia, and he supported the background. He was the co-author, the sponsor of the background checks bill that was proposed in 2013 after the Sandy Hook shooting, and he supported that bill on the condition that he included language that would make it doubly illegal for any federal official to compile new gun registries or new lists of gun owners and gun transactions. And that's something that's a red line for the NRA and for other people in the gun rights movement. So he backed the background checks bill then, but now we're in a different environment. We're now dealing with the Trump-led GOP. And Manchin is worried, like other people closer to the center in Congress, that if he supports either of these background check bills now, he's going to get voted out of office. And that is a very serious concern on his part. And the problem is, even though there's more support for gun reform now than ever before, the gun rights movement is invigorated, and they now see the combination of the pandemic as well as the Black Lives Matter protests, which I think put a great deal of fear, irrational fear, but fear into the minds of many Americans, has led to a state where now the NRA has gotten what it's always wanted, which is blanket opposition from a great many people in Congress to even the most seemingly benign and really symbolic steps forward for gun reform.
Frank, I wanted to go to Georgia Senator Reverend Raphael Warnock, who was speaking on NBC's Meet the Press Sunday after the shooting in the Atlanta area that killed 8 people, including 6 Asian American women.
This shooter was able to kill all of these folks the same day he purchased a firearm. But right now, what is our legislature doing? They're busy under the Gold Dome here in Georgia, trying to prevent people from being able to vote the same day they register. I think that suggests a distortion in values. When you can buy a gun and create this much carnage and violence on the same day, but if you want to exercise your right to vote as an American citizen, the same legislature that should be focused on this is busy erecting barriers to that constitutional right.
So that's Reverend Warnock, who is the one of 2 newest senators from Georgia. If you can comment on this, and also were you surprised by President Biden saying he supports an assault weapons ban? At this point, Biden, who was the point person as vice president for President Obama after the Sandy Hook massacre, the killing of all these 6-year-olds, to come up with legislation that would pass, and they ultimately were not able to accomplish any of that back in 2012, 2013.
Yeah, I don't think this is going to go well for Biden and for people in favor of gun reform. The way this is going forward. But in terms of the notion that you can buy a gun, it's easier to buy a gun, and you can buy a gun faster than you can register to vote in Georgia as well as in other states. This reflects the notion that nothing should impede the ability of citizens to be able to buy arms, whatever arms they want, as easily as they possibly can, merely by showing a driver's license and being able to establish residency, and that they are an adult in most cases, 18, or in some states 21. That is what the gun rights movement wants. They want no impediment to be able to buy firearms. And going back to your last guest, Representative Sullivan, the reason they want this firepower is they want to be able to fight criminals as well as armed mobs. And the Rodney King riots and scenes from that back in 1992 are iconic and still loom large for people in the gun rights community. And they also want to be armed to be able to fight government forces, including law enforcement. So they want to have the same level of firepower as police do. That's why they want AR-15s. And they do not care. It's the price of freedom as far as they're concerned. If kids get killed, first graders get killed in Connecticut, or women and others get shot in Atlanta, or people get killed in a supermarket in Boulder. That doesn't matter as long as they have access.
So
Most Americans don't buy this, but that's a dominant view. Go ahead. Sorry.
Well, I want to go to Rebecca Peters. She led the movement in Australia to change gun laws after a gunman killed 35 people in Tasmania in April 28th. 1996. I mean, this is so significant. You have a gun-loving nation, but the laws effectively ended mass shootings in Australia. I spoke to her a few years ago.
We had in those days a series of massacres. We had a massacre about once a year, and each time it was there was an outcry. There was a lot of grief and anger and discussion about what should happen and pressure on the politicians. But each time the politicians had said, well, this shouldn't be, everyone agreed it shouldn't be a party political issue, but neither of the major parties was prepared to move first. And so I suppose that the thing that happened was the electoral the electoral makeup of the government favoured us at the time. We had just had a new government elected. It was a conservative government. And in a sense, it's easier for a conservative government to change the gun laws because they are more, the Conservative Party was seen more as the natural ally of the gun lobby. But really, you know, people die the same, whatever party they vote for. And so, but we thought it was particularly courageous of the Conservative Prime Minister to say, I'm going to deal with this once and for all.
And explain over the 2 weeks and then the year what exactly the rules were that got passed for the people of Australia. And this massively dramatic well, I mean, no more massacres in Australia.
Yeah. So one of the important, so the principal change was that the ban on semi-automatic weapons, rifles and shotguns, assault weapons, and that was accompanied by a huge buyback. And in the initial buyback of those weapons, almost 700,000 guns were collected and destroyed. There were several further iterations over the years, and now almost over a million guns have been collected and destroyed in Australia. And but also the thing is that sometimes countries will make a little tweak in their laws, but if you don't, you have to take a comprehensive approach. It doesn't, if you just ban one type of weapon or if you just ban one category of person, if you don't do something about the overall supply, then basically it's very unlikely that your gun laws will succeed.
Where does the U.S. stand when it comes to gun massacres in the industrialized world?
Well, the U.S. has the highest rate of gun deaths in the industrialized world. And in terms of, so for example, the rates of gun deaths in the U.S. are about 11 times higher than in Australia and up to 15, 20 times higher than in some other developed countries. But in terms of massacres, the U.S. has a larger number of massacres even than countries in the developing world or countries in conflict. The number of mass shootings that occur in the U.S. outstrips any other country in the world.
So that's Rebecca Peters, who spearheaded the move. In a matter of weeks, a gun-loving nation completely turns around and they end gun massacres in Australia. Frank Smythe, as we wrap up here, if you can comment on this and if you can see that possibility and maybe weave in the issue of the filibuster, is that what it would need, is the end of the filibuster in the U.S. Senate?
I think what needs to happen here is the Democrats and gun reformers need to start thinking strategically about this issue. And I don't think we've had an honest conversation about guns and gun policy in the United States for more than 50 years since President Johnson raised the issue of gun registration. Biden has put us an assault weapons ban and the issue of registering existing assault weapons for those who want to keep them as part of his plan. But he hasn't discussed the details. He hasn't explained to the American people how this would work, how this would not be a threat to people's freedom or lead to tyranny or genocide. And the problem is the Democrats have been trying to see what they can get past as opposed to taking a long-term strategic approach to challenging the propaganda that's been put out by the NRA for 40 years. Because the difference between the United States and New Zealand and Australia is the fact that we have the NRA, and even as the NRA is going down, it's their ideology that remains. And that's what hasn't been challenged. And the entire leadership of the GOP has bought into this ideology. So that has to be challenged. I don't think an assault weapons ban is going to happen under this administration, not unless the Democrats do extremely well in the midterms. Yes, removing the filibuster would eliminate a barrier, but the Republicans could come up with other ways to impede legislation. And the problem is the Democrats have finally gotten to the point where they've put real gun reform on the table, but we're still years away from getting there.
Frank Smythe, we want to thank you so much for being with us, longtime investigative journalist, author of The NRA, The Unauthorized History. Democracy Now! Is currently accepting applications for a senior news producer. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.